Alright, this is Dylan Goracki. I was the first speaker in this debate, which took place October 19th, 2015 on the Oklahoma State University campus, and I have to begin this video with a few apologies. Firstly, we had some technical difficulties at the very beginning of the debate, and as a result, we didn't have sound for the first several minutes of the video, so that's why we've recorded some audio and put my slides on the screen for you to see. Lastly, the professor whom Dr. Charles Jackson debated asked that he not be filmed and that his name not be released. So that's why you only see Dr. Jackson in this video. So that being said, I'll go ahead and begin my presentation. What I hope to communicate to you in the next few minutes, whether you're an atheist, a Christian, or anything else, is that billions of years of evolution is incompatible with the Bible. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm not saying that if you're a Christian who does believe all life evolved from a common ancestor over billions of years, then you're no Christian at all. I'm not saying that. I am saying that you're being inconsistent if you hold that view. So let's take a look at how this is relevant to the Bible. Well, first of all, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, God sees all that He's made and calls it very good. So if death was part of God's original creation, it also would have been very good. And we kind of instinctively know that that's not correct. If you look at the picture over here on the right, we know that the Garden of Eden being built on top of pain, death, disease, suffering, extinction, and the fossil record below it, we just know that that's not very good. When your friend or your family member dies, we don't go, yay, they died. Death is bad. It's very sad. And the Bible confirms this when it says in 1 Corinthians 15:26, the last enemy to be abolished or destroyed is death. So the first question is really, how can something which God considers an enemy be very good? It doesn't really make sense. Okay, so how does this affect the actual gospel of Jesus Christ? Well, in Genesis, it says that death is a result of man's sin. So that's the first point. But evolutionary theory, on the other hand, says death was a reality for billions of years before mankind even existed to sin. And therefore, death also obviously existed before sin. And that idea of death before sin undermines the gospel. How? Well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 21 to 22, we see the apostle says, for since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive. We know that's talking about physical death, not just spiritual death, because, at the end it says all will be made alive. It's not saying that everyone is made spiritually alive and goes to heaven. Anyway, and we also see in Acts chapter 3, God says He will restore His creation. We know that restore means to repair, to return it to a former or original condition. And in this restoration, there will be no death, as you see in Revelation 21. Jesus actually was a young earth creationist. I know that because in Mark chapter 10, Jesus is questioned about divorce. In response, he quotes Genesis as a literal historical account, not as if it's some myth that never really happened. And notice at the beginning of verse 6 where he states that man has been around since the beginning of Earth's existence. Let's take a look at it on a timeline here. There's the relevant portion in Mark 10:6. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So on a timeline here, with Jesus being all the way to the right of that top timeline, we have 4,000 years, approximately, of Earth history between the beginning and Jesus, and on the sixth day of after the beginning, Adam and Eve were created. So you can see that that's the beginning of creation. But if the evolutionary timeline is true, then billions of years ago, 13 to 15 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. And that was the beginning. And then 13 billion years later, we have Jesus all the way at the right. But in comparison to that 15 billion years, the 4,000 years between Adam and Eve and Jesus is nothing, as you can see In what way are they from the beginning of creation, if the evolutionary timeline is true? Ultimately, it comes down to this: who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust God, who is actually there at creation, who never makes mistakes, he knows everything, he always correctly interprets evidence, he never lies, and he was actually responsible for creation? Or are you going to trust man, who wasn't there, makes mistakes, has limited knowledge, often misinterprets the evidence, is sometimes dishonest, and had nothing to do with creation? That's what it really comes down to. And that is my portion of the debate. So next you will be seeing Dr. Charles Jackson.
Well, Susan, I wonder if you could get that, the first slide up, and also if there's some way to kill the lights that are shining right on the screen, washing out the picture there. While they're doing that, variation, tall people and short people, would exist in the population even if God made everybody. Also, survival of the fittest would still be true also. The fit people would naturally survive better even if God made everybody. And it's true that science studies the natural. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a little science presentation here on natural, not the supernatural, the natural. So why it was important about, how many have ever heard the term missing link? Missing link. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. If variation actually were able to variate us enough that monkey-like creatures, simian-like creatures could change and variate into human beings as we know them today, then it wouldn't be something that you'd see all the time because it would happen so slow, but there would be signs from the past, and it would be those missing link fossils. Charles Darwin himself said in his book, The Origin of the Species, the number of intermediate varieties which must have formerly existed on the earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum, rock layer, full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely gradated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory, which is why the fossils are so important, which is why after 150 years it's only become more and more obvious that there aren't missing links. Let me take a look at what we're talking about. The evolution story is here in many, many textbooks, and you see our family tree here. Now, the places where we actually don't have fossils that leave a sign that that part of our history happened is always right here at the turns, the forks in the road, where one kind turned into another kind. We do have plenty of orangs, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. And we have plenty of gorilla, orang, and chimpanzee and human fossils. What we don't have are these missing link fossils. So that's what we're always looking for if we're trying to prove evolution, and what we don't expect to see if we attend to the creation model. This is still a problem today as it was in Darwin's day. 2010, the last common ancestor of chimpanzees and humans is a holy grail. We thought we had it all nailed down, but now everything's up for grabs again. New Scientist magazine, 2011. Bernard Wood, a well-known evolutionist. The origin of our own genus remains unclear. And in 2012, Scientific American, with so little evidence to go on, the origin of our genus has remained as mysterious as ever. So this is still a difficult problem for evolutionary theorists. Now this is the newest of the evolutionary missing links, the Homo naledi. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to naledi. This is Australopithecus sediba, which was brought forth to the world in 2011 by the same man who brought forth the Homo naledi this month. This is Australopithecus sediba, and National Geographic made a big issue on this in 2011. Now this is Lee Berger who brought forth the fossil. And now I want you to take a look at the skull, take a look at the size of Dr. Berger's skull, and then take a look at what they've got. The creativity that is needed to go ahead and use imagination, and evolutionary guided imagination, is going to come up with a very human-like looking artist's reconstruction of this. The issue was discussed, the Sediba fossil in 2011. So what does this mean, that Australopithecus sediba is the missing link? Well, scientists don't like that term, which Berger calls biologically unsound, because missing link doesn't sound good for evolution. That's true. The researchers do caution. They suggest that Australopithecus sediba was ancestral to the human lineage. All these apparent resemblances between it and us could just be coincidences. So it isn't exactly rock solid, hard evidence. It's evidence, but is it compelling? Is it confirmation? No, the fossil doesn't confirm. A professor from Texas A&M said about sediba, it's a possible candidate ancestor for the genus Homo, our genus, Homo sapiens, our genus. But Ian Tattersall, one of the world's best-known authorities on Neanderthals and an evolutionist, said, sediba is a distinct species probably closely related to Australopithecus africanus, the one that comes after the famous Lucy fossil in the series. But I wouldn't classify it as the root of the Homo genus. Not that evolutionists are always disagreeing and they don't know what they're doing. It's that the evidence is open to interpretation enough that there's plenty of room for disagreement, which doesn't give the impression that these things are confirmations. They can be interpreted, and anyone's allowed to believe in evolution who wants to, of course, even in the scientific realm. But if we are talking about do fossils confirm evolution, I'm going to show you no. Now, here's another fossil that came out earlier, but in 1998, National Geographic talked about it, and Lee Berger made mention of it. This is the Australopithecus africanus, the one that comes after Lucy, supposed to be 1 million years later, but actually looks more like a monkey. Berger said, even though it came 1 million years later in the story, and it was supposed to be more human-like, it actually was more monkey-like, exactly the opposite of what evolutionary theory would predict. Berger thinks it's more likely that the two species evolved separately, Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, and Australopithecus africanus, the next one there. The most probable idea is afarensis and africanus are sister species that share a missing link ancestor. If so, only one could be ancestral to humans. Now, I mentioned this comment by him in 1998 because now we're going to come to Lee Berger, who brought forth to the world Australopithecus sediba in 2011, and it was very controversial. You don't see it on very many of the charts, except the ones that Berger has drawn. And then the next one that came out this month, well, last month, in Lee Berger, also in South Africa, the Homo naledi, which he put in our genus. Now, there is, of course, a lot of disagreement about the interpretation. Is it really our ancestor? Lee Berger says, admits the lack of an accurate age complicates the news of the discovery. If our present understanding of time frame for the genus Homo is right, then Naledi must be somewhere older than 2 million years as a species in its origins. It's possible, however, says Berger, that the fossils could be less than 100,000 years old. And so the time thing is a problem. It's got to fit into the evolution storyline, but without any evidence about how old it is, it's difficult. Without dates, its evolutionary significance is unknown, says Carol Ward of the University of Missouri. When these new fossils come out, and not very much is known about them, inferences, predictions, and imaginations are appropriate because not much is known yet. And it makes the fanfare in all of the newspapers and the magazines and the popular journals and things like that. But then later, when more is learned about it and it becomes much less spectacular and far more doubtful that it's in our lineage at all, even by evolutionary critiques, then those things aren't heard about. And so all that's remembered is the original headlines. And then somehow they slip themselves into textbooks and to permanent charts. Here, take a look. This is a human foot. The foot bones are straight, and your finger bones between your knuckles are completely straight. But in a chimpanzee, the toe bones and the hand and the foot actually look very, very much alike in a chimpanzee. The hand bones are actually curved. The finger bones are curved between the knuckles, a significant difference between humans and the chimps. Well, it turns out that Naledi had dramatically curved fingers, similar to Australopithecus, Lucy, and that other one. And then they say Homo naledi likely walked much like us. By the way, Berger and his team originally submitted their papers on Homo naledi to the prestigious journal Nature, one of the most revered and oldest science journals in the world, which rejected them. And then they later went and put on something that was a little easier to get it published, eLife. Now, about Australopithecus afarensis, almost certainly did not walk like us, says this guy here from the American Museum of Natural History and a professor from West Michigan University in 2005 in Scientific American. So if Homo naledi walked like us, likely walked like us, and has very similar finger and toe bones to Australopithecus, and Australopithecus didn't walk like us, just, put 2 and 2 together and make the link here. This is definitely not an open and shut case. Features of the teeth and lower body raise doubts about whether the new finds come from an early Homo species, asserts Susan Anton of New York University. She says the fossils are fabulous and a bit confusing. Fred Spoor from University College in London doubts that Homo naledi was a direct ancestor of modern humans. The possibility that Homo naledi deliberately disposed of bodies in the cave is interesting and intriguing, but will also be controversial. Tim White, who is the head of the Evolution Center at University of California, Berkeley, says he observed that the claims that the hominids, Homo naledi, might have buried their dead were hyped heavily in publicity materials. There's no evidence of the burial rituals, the Berkeley professor said. The only evidence seems to be we can't think of anything else. This is not evidence. Now, Tim White's a long-standing spokesman in the evolutionist community. He was the one that brought forth to the world the Ardipithecus ramidus fossil back in 2010. And he has kind of become the spokesman for the critiquing of Homo naledi in a negative way in the evolutionist community. Not to say that that means that the fossil doesn't mean anything in the evolutionist world. What I am saying is not enough is known about it to actually shut down many, many different interpretations. And maybe later more will be known. Dr. White says, that probably it's Homo erectus, upright walking man, another already known missing link fossil. He said during a recent interview at his Berkeley lab, I wrote a text on human osteology, the study of bones. I also teach a class on osteological variation in humans. Many of the characteristics that Berger and company claim differentiate Homo naledi from Homo erectus, the one that he thinks it is, vary within our own species. So you look at that and you realize these claims of a new species are a little sketchy. Yes, as a creationist, I'd say it's a little sketchy too. It's probably just another one of these dead monkey fossils. Now don't forget, the creation model would say that the creator created monkeys and people, never monkey people. But of course evolution needs these missing link transition forms, so you need monkey-like people and people-like monkeys in a long series leading from the monkey-like creatures to the human creatures we see today. Ian Lee Berger says, Homo naledi is already practically the best-known fossil member of our lineage. Well, that didn't take very long, did it? And then Tim White, the director of Human Evolution Research Center at UCal Berkeley, a big evolution think tank, says the claims of a new species are a little sketchy. While not very much information is known, things are sketchy, and many different interpretations can come forth. But as soon as more is known, these things usually drop out. There is a chart from National Geographic. Note that none of the branches on this family tree has any connection to any kind of trunk in any way that's not imaginary. This chart was actually made by Lee Berger, and he inserted the Sediba fossil in here, changing the progression of the family tree from these branches. All these are branches that really have no natural connection. Here's Homo sapiens, there's Neanderthals, there's Heidelberg man, and there's Homo erectus, upright walking man, as they said before. And the Tumai fossil, Sahelanthropus tchadensis, isn't even on that list. That'll become important later, should that come up. So this was made by Lee Berger, basically to couch the Sediba into the story. Let me take a look here. In 2009, shortly after the Ardipithecus ramidus fossil was brought to the world by Tim White, this chart was an updated chart of the story of evolution in our family tree. Sahelanthropus tchadensis is put on there, but there were some problems with that. I don't have time to go into all of these, but I want to show you kind of a snapshot of the problems with each of these now that they've been known for more than 2 months. Actually, some kind of ape, not a hominid at all, says Milford Walpoth at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. The Washington Post says, a line of non-hybrids that were not human ancestors at all. Not the first creature ancestral to only humans after all, Newsweek reported on evolution professors' statements and researchers. Basically, Sahelanthropus is monkey bones by the creation model, and the DNA and the strata conflict and make the evolutionary order wrong. DNA interpretations by evolutionary theories say that we should have split off from the monkeys at 6 million years ago, not 7. So that's why it wasn't on Lee Berger's chart. That's already been taken off by most evolutionists. The next one, Millennium Man or Auroran. Sahelanthropus and Auroran should be in the same genus, says UCal Berkeley, just because of their bone structure. Well, if Sahelanthropus is in the same genus as Auroran, it's very unlikely that Auroran would be our ancestor either, if it's the same thing as Sahelanthropus, so I'm crossing that off the list. Then Ardipithecus ramidus itself. Tim White, who brought the fossil to the world, said himself, and this is a direct quote, "This is not the common ancestor." And yet, the journals, National Geographic, and many other sources are saying it's in our family tree. Then Lucy, relegating Lucy to a side branch on the family tree, the New York Times reported in 2008. Scientific American said that what I just already showed you, Australopithecus afarensis, almost certainly did not walk like us. Lucy's been dropped by many researchers, maybe not most, as just a monkey that is actually a side branch on our family tree. Australopithecus africanus, the town child that comes after 1 million years later in the story. Okay, so these are just examples of other ones that do have problems, so they do exist. The problems exist, I mean, and, well, if we need to go into it in more detail later, we will. Thank you. Pull up under round 2, Erectus habilis. That would be good. We were just told that this is not a scientific debate, it's a philosophical debate. I'm a science teacher, so I really can't do anything but talk about science. I don't have credentials to speak authoritatively on philosophy, so I want to go ahead and look at where some of these fossil finds would fit into the story. Now, evolution needs scientific documentation to lend credence to the stories that are told. The ideas about cousins and grandfathers and branches on the family tree, but eventually you got to have parents in order to have cousins and grandparents. You've got to have a parental line, and we've got to find something if we're going to find anything for evolution. So let's take a look at habilis and erectus here, and take a look at some of the scientific evidence and some of the interpretations that have gone back and forth and some of the facts. Now, science has got to go by facts and truth. It can't just be stories. We got to have stories because we got to have theories and we got to have models. But facts trump theories every time, or we're not talking science anymore. We're talking about some sort of a fanatical religious belief and a lifestyle preference, or whatever you want to call it. Newsweek 2007 had the article here saying that DNA studies make it clear Homo erectus was almost certainly a dead end and not, as many people thought, our ancestor. Here's something that happened in 2007. Now, these are 2 Homo erectus skulls, a male and a female. A huge sexual dimorphism, the kind of size difference we only find in apes, where a gorilla male might actually be exactly twice the size of a female. We don't see this in humans. We do see it in apes. This is a male Homo erectus skull and a female Homo erectus skull. Now, this is a Homo habilis skull here, and in 2007 they dated some Homo habilis skulls and Homo erectus skulls and found out that one did not come 1 million years after the other one, but that they were dated by the potassium argon method, which I personally don't think works correctly, not with the assumptions they have, but they dated it that way and found out they were the same age. How can this one come, and these be like grandparent and parent and grandchild if they lived at the same time? It's like saying you're the same age as your grandparent. Again, Fred Spohr from University College London, who made these date measurements, says it was like finding out that your grandmother and your great-grandmother were really sisters. This is the kind of thing that throws a wrench in the story. But you know what? It's science, it's data, it's facts. And if that throws a wrench in your story, you have to change the story. Also, Homo ergaster and Homo erectus were declared probably the same thing in 1997, so that would throw that one out if DNA says that Homo erectus isn't our ancestor. Let's see. No. All right, and I want to also deal, because I only have 10 minutes here, with the human chromosome fusion. You know, if God made monkeys and people, and they look so much like us, of all the other living creatures, chimpanzees are the most like us. Their brains are 1/3 the size of ours, but they have binocular vision. Instead of claws, they have nails like we do, and an opposable thumb. They just have them on their feet also. It would not be any surprise if humans and chimps would actually have the same number of chromosomes. And maybe humans did once have 24 pairs of chromosomes. And maybe in the human lineage, somewhere along the line, we fused chromosome 12 and 13 and turned it into chromosome 2 in the humans. Now, I'm not saying that there's absolute proof that happened or that it didn't, but it would make very much sense in the creation model, but not in the evolution model, and here's why. Every single living human being has the chromosome 2 fusion. Not a single simian species that exists has it. It's something that only exists in humans. It's actually evidence that if we ever were related, this doesn't really prove it. It actually is something only unique in humans. And it's not in simians. It's actually evidence that our family lineages aren't the same. Because why doesn't any monkey have the fusion and every single human does? If the evolution story is true, then it must have happened right at the time when humans broke off from the monkeys, because all of us have got it and none of the monkeys do. That's a pretty far stretch to try to think of how could this actually, what are the chances? And we're trying to think rationally, we're trying to think logically. Since all humans have the what is proposed to be the simian 12-13 fusion to make human chromosome number 2, all humans have got that and no monkeys do. It's actually evidence that the lineages are separate from each other and not related. If the issue has always been, has there been change? Of course things change over generations. You can see it in your family. The issue really is, can one kind of living thing, like a monkey, change into a human? Or a monkey-like thing change into a human over many long periods of time? The Origin of the Species is the name of Darwin's book. But it really should be the origin of the phyla and the genera and the orders, not just the species, not just these little steps. Why not go ahead and tell the truth that fish evolved into eagles? And there was a time when there were only bacteria on this earth. That's in the evolution story, that only bacteria were alive. And then they became giraffes and T-Rexes and pterodactyls and blue whales and people. Now, that's the big jump. And I realize that makes it sound more ludicrous. And well, maybe in little teeny-weeny changes, maybe there are little teeny-weeny changes that they can only go so far, and then they just have to stop. You see little teeny-weeny changes in your families, in human families in your own memory. But there's always limits. People reproduce and make people. Monkeys reproduce and make monkeys. The truth is the only thing that matters in science. We'll say something like, well, I see it all the time. I see evolution in my lab. I see butterflies and moths changing color, and that insinuates that microorganisms change into humans. It's a really big leap. Louis Pasteur said, don't put forward anything you can't prove by an experiment. And he was one of the great chemical experimenters, created the vaccine for rabies, many other different things, pasteurization. Nikola Tesla said, scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. Look, I'm looking for clear thinking. I'm looking for data, evidence, logic, facts. That's what science has to go on. And stories, like I said, hypotheses and theories are important for heuristic value, but if they're not backed by the data and the evidence and the logic and the facts, then they only are stories, and they can only be regarded as stories. I heard a professor speak at the University of Oklahoma Dream Course lecture series. He said the laws of evolution could have turned out differently. Once they say the laws evolve, we'll realize those aren't the laws. So the laws of nature comes from a time when science and religion were closer. He said, we might have moved beyond the laws of nature. I'm sorry, when you move beyond the scientific laws, you're not in science anymore. You're not talking about truth, you're talking about what you want to be true, and we do not make reality, we discover reality. That's what the scientific method says. Let's see, Tim White, the guy who did critique the Homo naledi and also found the Ardipithecus ramidus, said, a 5-million-year-old piece of bone that was thought to be a collarbone of a human-like creature is actually part of a dolphin rib. The problem with a lot of anthropologists is they want so much to find a hominid that any scrap of bone becomes a hominid bone. The saying, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. When you're so anxious to make a certain find. And Tim White had a good sense of humor. He called it Flipperithecus. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, giving words to Sherlock Holmes, says, it is a capital error to theorize before one has the facts. Inevitably, one bends the facts to fit the theory rather than the theory to fit the facts. And I think that's unhealthy science. I don't think it's logical. You can't do that sort of thing, and you shouldn't. Yes, I find this humorous. Stephen Jay Gould from Harvard said this, the extreme rarity of transitional forms, links, in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. We paleontologists fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history, yet we view our data as so bad that we never see the very process we profess to study. And a story is okay, but don't say, if you don't go for that story, you don't go for my interpretation of what the fragmentary fossil record says, is my story. You can't say that that's anti-intellectual or anti-science or borders out there on the philosophical. Few sciences produce such abundant returns from so few fragments of fact as paleontology. You wind out stories based on imagination. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good, but you should admit you're hypothesizing. You should admit that you're making assumptions and presumptions. And you should admit that you're using your own model, your own scientific model, scientific theory to guide you in those imaginations. That's honest, that's okay. But putting it all in the textbooks as though it's been proved and we got this is not true. Kenneth Miller of Finding Darwin's God. Kenneth Miller also wrote one of the most popular high school biology textbooks in the country, makes this statement, the theory of evolution has no weaknesses. No honest scientist says that. I know he's smarter than that. All scientific theories have weaknesses. That's actually more like evangelism than science. Let me see. Don't you think I'd know if I was wrong? It's a little Sheldon Cooper thing there. Darwin himself said, I'm quite conscious that my speculations run quite beyond the bounds of true science. Thank you.